I'm about to ask you a question that you probably think you know the answer to. Did you hear the story about how the Trump administration dropped its super controversial subpoena? How the Trump administration completely embarrassed itself in court and had to walk it all back? Now, if you've been following the news today, which you probably have, you might be tempted to answer that question with, yeah, Jen, I think I have heard that story. I know the one you're talking about. But don't be so sure you've heard it all. Because if someone asks you, did you hear about Donald Trump's embarrassing subpoena fail? The only correct response to that question is, which one? Which embarrassing subpoena fail are you talking about? Because somehow there are so many stories in the news recently that fit that very specific description. I mean, for instance, there was this headline today in the New York Times, quote, Trump administration drops subpoena demanding list of Jews from Penn. Yeah, you heard that correctly. I'm literally reading from the headline in the New York Times. The Trump administration had to drop its subpoena for a list of Jews. Now, you see, the backstory here is that last year when Donald Trump launched his campaign to target America's colleges and universities, Trump's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had the bright old idea of sending a subpoena to the University of Pennsylvania. And that subpoena demanded membership rosters of, quote, all clubs, groups, organizations, and recreation groups that were related to the Jewish religion, faith, ancestry, and national origin. Yep. Now, the University of Pennsylvania rightfully fought back. They noted in their response that the Trump administration had entirely disregarded the frightening and well-documented history of governmental entities that undertook efforts to identify and assemble information regarding persons of Jewish ancestry. You don't say. And so today, the Trump administration, they quietly withdrew that subpoena. Maybe they realized it wasn't a great look to be issuing subpoenas that sound like they may have been drafted in Germany in the 1930s. Maybe. They don't usually have that much moral clarity, though. So maybe they simply realized they were going to lose in court. Who knows? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, you got me. I thought you were talking about the Trump administration's other subpoena fail, the one where they tried to subpoena journalists. But that still begs the question, which one? Because the Trump administration has had several recent embarrassing walkbacks that fit that even more specific description. Just last month, the New York Times reported that the Justice Department withdrew several subpoenas that would have forced reporters from the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post to testify before a federal grand jury. And people familiar with the matter told the Times that the Justice Department had sought information from 3 reporters at the Wall Street Journal about an article detailing how top officials warned Mr. Trump of the risks of a major military campaign against Iran. It also sought information from a reporter at the Washington Post about reporting related to U.S. military action in Venezuela. But the Justice Department, they backed down after the news organizations fought them in sealed filings. The Trump administration is waging a campaign targeting journalists and their sources in their hunt for leakers at the White House. But it's clear those efforts are failing, as media organizations are starting to stand up more and more and more and push back more and more and more. Which brings me to the Trump administration's other big subpoena fail, the one you probably have heard about. Because today the Department of Justice withdrew its subpoenas to several New York Times journalists who reported on the security issues plaguing Trump's Qatari gift plane. You know that one, his favorite little toy. Those subpoenas were withdrawn after the Trump administration got a humiliating smackdown, and I was just referencing with Chris, from a federal judge. And I'm going to get to that part in a moment. But first, I think it's worth reflecting just briefly on how we got here. Because remember last year, Trump accepted a luxury jet from Qatar as a, quote, gift, a jet that his administration has refused to rule out letting him keep after he leaves office. He wanted to use that jet as his new Air Force One, which would have required significant security upgrades at taxpayers' expense. Then earlier this month, Trump decided to take his new jet to the NATO summit in Turkey, surprising many security experts who were skeptical that the necessary upgrades would have been completed in time. Then after reigniting his war with Iran, Trump announced that abruptly that he'd be leaving Turkey aboard the original Air Force One, claiming at the time it was so U.S. service members could see his favorite new toy. And despite the fact that he also claimed it wasn't a security issue, most people suspected that the real reason was that the Qatari jet was not secure enough for presidential travel. And it wasn't long, of course it wasn't, before the New York Times confirmed through reporting what everyone had already suspected, that Trump's luxury gift jet fell short of the standards necessary to keep the president of the United States as safe as possible. Now, that was a legitimate scoop from those reporters at the New York Times. But it also wasn't exactly a big national security secret they were breaking. I mean, after all, as some experts pointed out, some of the security systems you need to protect Air Force One are actually quite visible on the exterior of the plane. And earlier this week, Trump himself almost appeared to confirm the Times reporting when he was asked why he wasn't using the new plane.
President, this plane does not have anti-missile defense systems.
Well, it has a lot, and it has a lot of capability. But as I understand it, in about a month or so, they're going to send it to have it be maxed out. So they're going to be sending it, and they'll have it be maxed out. It'll take about a month.
There you go. Of course, none of that stopped the Trump administration from taking the drastic action of subpoenaing the journalists who embarrassed the president by pointing out the deficiencies of his shiny new toy. Now, subpoenaing a reporter or news media organization about their sources is a very serious thing because the First Amendment usually protects reporters and their right to keep sources confidential, which is why the Justice Department is supposed to exercise extreme caution anytime an investigation zeroes in on members of the press. They know they have to meet a very high bar. But Trump's DOJ appears to have thrown caution to the wind in their wild goose chase to find the leakers who bruised Trump's fragile ego. And they screwed this up in so many different ways. In fact, some of those subpoenas were so reckless and so broad that they sought records not just from the journalists themselves, but those journalists' family members as well. So when a federal judge grilled them today, and the federal judge did grill them, the DOJ's lawyers had to admit over and over again in open court that their subpoenas had some obvious flaws. Flaws they repeatedly tried to characterize as, quote, inadvertent errors, oversights, and mistakes. That's how they described them. And given their many admitted errors, the judge repeatedly asked the DOJ lawyers if they wanted to withdraw their subpoena or suffer the embarrassment of having him quash them himself. Now, the DOJ lawyers eventually took the judge up on his offer and withdrew the subpoenas. It's honestly hard to overstate what a huge embarrassment this was for the DOJ. And they made no secret of the fact that they were waging an uphill battle, given how little due diligence they had actually done before resorting to the subpoenas against journalists. But then immediately after the hearing was over, the Justice Department released a statement blasting the judge and claiming his conduct overrides clear, longstanding principles and common sense, which is quite rich, given just how many times DOJ lawyers admitted in court that they themselves screwed up the subpoenas. Now, we also learned from this hearing that Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche himself signed off on these subpoenas, which is embarrassing for Todd Blanche, the guy who's waiting to see if there are the votes to be the Attorney General, given how sloppy they were, these subpoenas. But also a clear indication of just how important this witch hunt was to the Trump administration and probably to Donald Trump himself. Now, it should come as no surprise that Trump and his administration were willing to trample over the principle of press freedom in their effort to placate the president. But what might be a surprise is just how quickly those efforts fall apart when news organizations stand up and push back. Remember that Trump has been targeting media organizations since day one of this administration. And early on, we saw several major media outlets effectively surrender in advance. None of that appeased Donald Trump. Of course it didn't. He kept pushing the boundaries and abusing power to curtail the free press. But now more major media organizations are standing up to him and learning that when they fight back, they actually usually win.